Tonight, the last liftoff.
Let's light this fire one more time, Mike, and witness this great nation at its best.
America at its best and most challenged. Bob Orr on the glorious final launch. Kelly Kobiea with the hundreds of thousands who witnessed history. But after the thrill, for space workers, the layoffs begin. What's next?
Food stamps.
Anthony Mason has today's national jobs report, troubling new information on hiring.
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley, reporting tonight from the Kennedy Space Center.
Good evening. Today, for the last time, America reached for the heavens with its space shuttle. Atlantis, the last in the fleet, roared aloft on a tower of flame, the 135th shuttle launch over 30 years, an ending to what is perhaps the greatest engineering achievement of all time. But this day was bittersweet, because many people who shared in that achievement and depended on the shuttle for their livelihood will soon be out of work in the toughest job market in decades. These are the numbers that brought the country back down to earth today. The Labor Department reported that the economy created only 18,000 jobs last month. And with that, the unemployment rate rose to 9.2%, the highest since December. Anthony Mason begins our coverage.
For more than 14 million unemployed Americans, June was a discouraging month. Private companies added only 57,000 jobs. And with state governments struggling, Minnesota's has shut down, nearly 40,000 government workers lost their jobs. After 3 months in which the economy looked strong, averaging more than 200,000 job gains, in May and June, it just flatlined.
Businesses just froze. They're not laying off workers, but they have stopped hiring.
Economist Mark Zandi believes higher gas prices stalled out an economy still trying to get back to full speed.
The size of the economy is actually bigger than it was before the recession hit. However, we're lucky if we've got a quarter of the jobs back.
Economist Lakshman Achuthan sees a fundamental shift in the economy that's affected our ability to create jobs.
I think a lot of people think the jobs problem right now was caused by the recession.
No, it wasn't. Something was ailing our economy before the Great Recession in the jobs markets.
In the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, the U.S. economy created more than 18 million jobs during each decade. But from 2000 to 2007, the economy added only 7 million.
The 7 years before the Great Recession hit marked the worst business cycle we have on record as far as job creation goes.
Economist Heidi Shearholtz.
We have now faced about 11 years of really weak jobs growth.
And Scott, the so-called underemployment rate, which includes those who've given up looking or been forced to work part-time, is now back up above 16% again.
Thanks, Anthony. On this day, Central Florida is the epicenter of layoffs in America. As the shuttle flew away, so did jobs. Here in Brevard County, the unemployment rate is already 10.8%. Layoffs started a few years ago, but the last shuttle means thousands more space workers across the country have met the end. We talked to some of the people who've spent decades on America's space adventure, and they're finding for the unemployed, this can be a hostile planet.
There are some people who have been laid off.
We met 18 shuttle workers at a job center called Brevard Workforce. They come here to prospect for jobs and to work on their resumes and interview skills. A lot of them haven't looked for work in 30 years. Can I see hands again for the folks who are currently unemployed? Greg, I'll start with you. How long have you been unemployed?
October 2009.
October 2010.
March of this year?
Before Santiago.
Copy that.
Way back in 1990, the shuttle program peaked with 32,000 workers. But now it's 6,300 and dropping fast. Liz Vasquez is a single mother who lost her job as an office worker. Her house is in foreclosure. Her unemployment checks just ran out. She's been out of work since December 2009.
I actually had my first interview about 3 months ago.
Let me see if I just heard you right. You got your first interview after more than a year and a half?
Yep. I've been trying all this time, and I thought for sure, you know, I have an associate's degree, it's not a bachelor's, but I thought for sure with all my skills and years of experience that I would have gotten something.
What's next?
Food stamps, $200 a month, and then I guess I just have to figure it out, wing it.
I've been a lifelong space buff.
Former shuttle technician Greg Cecil has a master's degree, but he's run into a problem that we've been seeing all over the country these days.
A lot of people I talk with online that used to work out at Kennedy Space Center, we're noticing a trend. If you're 45 or older, you don't get interviews. Definitely. But some of the ones that have gotten laid off that are under 45 are picking up jobs.
Do you think you're too old to rehire and too young to retire? Is that the idea?
Definitely.
We asked what they would be willing to do to support their families, and we got an answer we never expected.
I'm trying to get out to Afghanistan, of all places. And that's where the money's at. I want to go too.
You're trying to go to Afghanistan?
There are people that are going.
What are you trying to do in Afghanistan?
Rebuild.
Yeah, make a living.
How many people think there are opportunities in Afghanistan?
Oh, I know it. I've heard many people.
Turns out their aerospace skills fit the war, and the war fits their special sense of duty.
These people maintained, built, and operated a human spaceflight program and produced for the American people, produced the crown jewel for the United States. And that's what we want to do.
How many of you expected to retire in the space program? Everybody. How many of you have dipped into your retirement savings at this point? So you're spending your future that you were socking away.
Well, I figured the day I wake up dead, I won't go to work. It's the bottom line. There's not going to be anything for me to retire on.
Difficult as the jobs picture is tonight, there was celebration this morning here at the Kennedy Space Center. Bob Orr, it was a perfect end to the shuttle program, a picture-perfect launch.
It was marvelous to see, Scott, and tonight's shuttle Atlantis is safely on its way to the International Space Station, but only after a morning of drama that ended in a spectacular launch.
Despite a dismal forecast of overcast skies and possible storms around Launch Pad 39A, the 4 astronauts of Atlantis strapped in for the final launch of a U.S. space shuttle. NASA searched for a window in the clouds, and 12 minutes before the scheduled liftoff, Shuttle Director Mike Leinbach radioed Atlantis Commander Chris Ferguson that he looked good to go.
So on behalf of the greatest team in the world, good luck to you and your crew on the final flight of this true American icon.
Let's light this fire one more time, Mike, and witness this great nation at its best.
But with just 31 seconds left in the countdown, a snag.
Clock will hold at T-minus 31 seconds due to a failure.
And we have had a failure.
NASA quickly cleared what essentially was a false alarm, and the big clock rolled once again.
Go for main engine start.
Despite lingering concerns about potential rain and lightning.
And liftoff, the final liftoff of Atlantis.
Atlantis roared towards the heavens.
The space shuttle spreads its wings one final time for the start of a sentimental journey into history.
Rocketing into the clouds, the shuttle headed for its Sunday rendezvous with the International Space Station, carrying 10,000 pounds of equipment and supplies, enough to last through 2012.
Atlantis, go at throttle up.
Dozens of NASA cameras tracked the shuttle's fiery climb, and a camera on the external fuel tank focused closely on the heat shield on the belly of the orbiter. Our preliminary analysis revealed no worries, no indications that the vulnerable insulating tiles suffered any debris damage on launch. For NASA, this was a textbook start for the end, because when Atlantis comes home, the 30-year shuttle program will be shut down, a sobering reality that tempered today's celebration.
Of course, there is still plenty of work to do on this mission, and NASA will stay focused, be assured of that, until Atlantis rolls to its final stop in 12 or 13 days, Scott.
Bob, we don't know when Americans are going to leave this spaceport again, and I wonder what's next for the U.S. space program.
It's all very uncertain. Long-term, NASA would like to build its own heavy-lift rocket again and go into deep space. In the interim, for 3 to 5 years, we'll hitch a ride on Soyuz from Russia. And then commercial developers will try to build us a new platform that will get us back to the space station. But it's all literally up in the air.
Thank you very much, Bob. We can show you the pictures, but it's difficult to capture the feel of a shuttle launch. Our studio here, 3 miles from the pad, shook like it was in an earthquake. Hundreds of thousands of people came from all over the country to feel that too, and Kelly Kobiea was out there among them.
Chris Bell has dreamed of this moment since he was a kid.
Oh, look at that, guys. I've been promising myself for 20 years that I wanted to see a launch, and I kind of ran out of opportunities. So this was our last chance.
The umbrella stays shut.
Bell drove 1,100 miles from Detroit to Titusville with his mother-in-law and 3 children and spent the night in a tent in the pouring rain to make sure his family had front row seats to history.
I know how much enjoyment, how much excitement I got just seeing launches on television and going to space camp and being a part, growing up with that. And I know this is something that at least the 2 boys they're gonna remember.
Along Florida's Space Coast, people staked out any open patch of grass they could find. Many came 2 days ago and slept when and where they could, all for just the incredible 42 seconds between liftoff and the shuttle's disappearance in the clouds.
It's one of the most amazing things I have ever seen in my entire life, and I'm so emotional. It was fabulous.
The rumble of rockets has drawn crowds to this coast for 50 years. For Mercury and Apollo, the shuttle's first flight, and today for its last. It was also a spectacle that left the Bell boys believing the sky was no longer the limit.
Did you know I'm going to be the first king on the moon?
And millions more here and beyond, marveling at the journey.
It was hard for people to leave this park today. They stayed until they could no longer hear or see the shuttle. And then, Scott, they gave Atlantis one last standing ovation.
Thanks, Kelly. President Obama today blamed the bad jobs numbers in part on worries that the United States might default on its debts. He said that prospect has employers afraid to hire. Bob Schieffer is our chief Washington correspondent and anchor of Face the Nation. Bob, is that really why they're not hiring?
Well, I'll tell you something, Scott. Worry about the country going into default may be part of it, but this job situation was getting bad long before people began to worry about defaulting. This marks the 29th month in a row now that unemployment has been above 8%. That is the longest stretch it's been that high since the 1930s. Having said that, I doubt that many people would argue with the president when he says it can only get worse if Congress does not find a way to raise the debt ceiling so the government can borrow the money it needs to pay its bills. But he got a double-barrel reminder today of just how hard that is going to be to get a deal. On the left, you had the leader of the House Democrats, Nancy Pelosi. She said no way Democrats would accept cuts in Social Security benefits. And on the right, the Republican leader in the House, John Boehner, said he didn't believe the 2 sides were any closer to an agreement tonight than they ever were. Well, they are all meeting again on Sunday, Scott. But I tell you, if there is a deal cooking, it is a long way from being done.
Thanks, Bob. Sunday on Face the Nation, Bob's guests will be Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner and Senators Jeff Sessions and Bill Nelson. The scandal that caused a British tabloid to fold has now landed on the Prime Minister's doorstep. And America makes history in space today and yesterday when the CBS Evening News continues. That hacking scandal that toppled a British tabloid is now shaking the foundations at 10 Downing Street. Today, the Prime Minister promised investigations as his former communications director was arrested. Elizabeth Palmer tells us the last word hasn't been written on this scandal.
The political damage control came from the very top.
We need a proper and full police investigation, then the public inquiry that I've set out very clearly today.
Prime Minister David Cameron's own reputation is now threatened by the growing News of the World scandal. Reporters from the paper are accused of hacking into the voicemail of as many as 4,000 people, including a murdered teenager and the families of fallen soldiers. The Prime Minister defended his decision to hire as an advisor the man who ran the paper at the time.
Andy Coulson said that he did not know what was happening at the News of the World in terms of hacking, and he resigned as a result of it, and I decided to give him a second chance.
This morning, Coulson was arrested. Another former editor, Clive Goodman, was arrested too after allegations that he had bribed police. So far, Rebecca Brooks, a former editor turned senior executive, hasn't been investigated, even though she told a parliamentary committee that
we have paid the police for information in the past.
Now public opinion has turned sharply against the paper's owner, Rupert Murdoch, one of the world's most powerful media tycoons. He bought the News of the World back in 1969 and made it the cornerstone of an empire that now includes Fox News and the Wall Street Journal. Simon Hoggart is a columnist for The Guardian. His newspaper's been investigating the scandal for years, and he says Murdoch is facing an enormous backlash.
So much. There was fear of Murdoch before a few days ago. Now it's just unalloyed loathing for the guy.
The Murdochs moved fast to close down the News of the World this week, but it's much easier to stop the presses than to repair a reputation tainted by lying and deceit.
Authorities announced just a short time ago that they've now arrested a third person in this scandal, a 63-year-old man, although we don't know yet who he is. And Rupert Murdoch himself is flying into London tomorrow from the U.S. to take charge personally of this spiraling mess. Scott?
Thanks, Liz. In Syria today, the streets were filled again with protesters calling for President Bashar al-Assad to go. We have amateur video from one of the biggest rallies in Hama. It was there in 1982 that Assad's father crushed a rebellion, killing as many as 25,000 protesters. This week, the U.S. and French ambassadors visited Hama to show their support for the protesters. It's been quite an adventure. From Mercury to Atlantis, Americans in space, when we come back. With the end, at least for now, of the manned space program, we were thinking today of how it all began and how much Walter Cronkite was part of that experience. In the early days of spaceflight, we didn't have a station here, we had a station wagon. Yet Walter managed to broadcast live on that day in 1961 when we put our first astronaut, Alan Shepard, on top of a rocket.
The Redstone rocket is ready, the Mercury capsule is ready, Commander Alan Shepard, our astronaut, is ready. Liftoff, Freedom 7 is still go, the trajectory is A-OK. The world can have no doubts that we did it, and the man who did it was Alan Shepard, Jr. History was made today, and you were an eyewitness. Your correspondent, Walter Cronkite.
And history was made today, exactly 50 years and 9 weeks after Shepard's flight. The shuttle program ends with no clear successor.
Liftoff.
The shuttle had its critics. It was expensive. There were accidents. But there was nothing like it in the world. Americans conceived it.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
When tragedy struck, Americans pressed ahead without fear. To a generation, man in space seemed as American as the constellation in our flag. But today marked the end of the heroic age of spaceflight when we all claimed ownership. The last shuttle left the Earth drawing a bright, burning line in the sky, the signature of people who dare to dream. And that's the CBS Evening News. I'm Scott Pelley at the Kennedy Space Center. For all of us at CBS News all around the world, good night.
Here's a sentimental journey into history.